My name is Amelia, and I was 28 years old when my parents asked me to save my sister. Charlotte was a force of nature, brash, beautiful, and the undisputed star of our family. She was 5 years older than me and had always treated me less like a sister and more like a permanent understudy. Charlotte's life was a series of dramatic highs and reckless lows, culminating in a diagnosis of severe liver disease at the age of 33. The doctors said a transplant was her only option, and time was running out. My parents' plea was not a request. It was a quiet, relentless pressure. "She's your sister, Amelia," my mother would say, her eyes swimming with tears. "You're our only hope." My father, ever the pragmatic one, presented it as a mathematical equation. I was a perfect match, a healthy young woman with a spare organ, and Charlotte was the daughter who needed it most. They painted a picture of me as the hero, the savior. They never mentioned Charlotte's cruelty, her endless taunts, or the way she had actively tried to sabotage every small success I ever had. They only spoke of family, of duty, and of a debt I had yet to repay. I hesitated. I thought about the years of being overshadowed, the hurtful words, the time she had thrown my childhood diary into a fire just to see me cry. I thought about the emptiness that lived inside me whenever I was around her, and the profound lack of gratitude she would show. But my parents' guilt trips were a powerful weapon. They had spent my whole life perfecting them. So I said yes. I underwent the grueling series of tests, the counseling, and the final preparations, all while Charlotte sat at home, complaining about the hospital food and demanding my parents' constant attention. The surgery was a blur of fluorescent lights, cold air, and the sharp, coppery taste of fear. I woke up in a world of pain, stitched together and feeling a part of me was missing. Charlotte was in the bed next to mine, already planning her redo party. My parents hovered over her, adjusting her pillows and cooing about her bravery. When my mother finally came to my side, she smiled a tired, strained smile and said, "You did a good thing, Amelia. Charlotte's going to be so happy." Not, "How are you feeling?" Not, "Are you in pain?" Just the reassurance that I had fulfilled my purpose. Recovery was long and lonely. My parents' attention remained entirely focused on Charlotte. I was an afterthought, a successful transaction. The resentment festered in my stitches, a quiet, angry hum beneath my skin. One afternoon, while I was sitting alone in my hospital room, I overheard a conversation between two nurses in the hallway. One was talking about Charlotte's post-op care, mentioning her long history of addiction, and the unusual circumstances of the transplant. The other nurse chuckled softly. "They said she was a perfect match, but you know how parents can be when their golden child is on the line. I heard they had to push for a genetic test just to be sure." The words hit me like a physical blow. A genetic test. My parents had always insisted it was just a regular blood test. I lay in bed, the pieces of my life clicking into place with a horrifying clarity. Why had my parents never been as affectionate with me as they were with Charlotte? Why had my childhood felt like an audition I was constantly failing? Was it possible that the perfect match was just a convenient lie, a final piece of emotional manipulation to get me to agree? The day I was discharged, I drove straight to a private clinic in a different part of the city. I was still weak, still sore, but a furious resolve had replaced my pain. I paid for a full ancestry and DNA test for myself, and later, using an old hairbrush from my parents' house, I submitted a sample for my mother. The results arrived a month later, an email I was almost too scared to open. When I finally did, the truth unfolded in a series of sterile scientific terms. The report confirmed my mother and I shared 0 genetic markers. We were not biologically related. I wasn't their child. I was adopted. My entire life, my family had been built on a lie. They had used my supposed status as their daughter to force a life-altering sacrifice out of me, a sacrifice they would never have asked of a stranger. My parents had treated me like a spare part, and it turned out that's exactly what I was. I went to my parents' house. I was no longer the quiet, deferential girl who had always tried to please them. I was a woman with nothing left to lose. I walked into the living room, where they were doting on a recovering Charlotte, and I laid the DNA test results on the coffee table. My mother's face went white. My father's jaw clenched. Charlotte, for the first time in her life, was speechless. "I did a DNA test," I said, my voice as steady as steel. "It turns out I'm not your daughter. And you knew it all along." My father's weak protests of, "We were going to tell you," were drowned out by my mother's panicked tears. Charlotte simply stared at me, a flicker of something like fear in her eyes. I didn't wait for an explanation. I didn't need one. Their silence was all the proof I needed. I looked at Charlotte, at the woman whose life I had saved. "I'm sorry you were sick, but you're not my sister. I owe you nothing." With that, I turned and walked out of the house, the door clicking shut behind me. It wasn't the end of my life. It was the beginning. I had lost a family built on lies, but in doing so, I had finally found my true self.